Hello and welcome to another spooky episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. I'm joined today by the guy whose Halloween costume this year is sexy film critic, Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
This year, for our Halloween special, we're doing a double-sized crossover with the weekly Film Pulse podcast and talk about 90s Japanese horror. And joining us on this journey is the host of the Eiga Night podcast and Asian film expert, Chris Luciantonio. Welcome back, Chris.
No problem. I'm glad my credentials precede me.
Japanese horror, J-horror, saw an explosion in the late 90s and into the 2000s with the success of films like The Ring. And this month we'll be continuing our conversation that we started about 90s J-horror and take a look at 4 more titles released in the latter half of the decade. I'm sure we're going to be referencing some of the films that we talked about in the first part of the show. So if you haven't yet, you might want to give that a listen first, and then you can find it on the main Film Pulse feed on your podcast service of choice. And I'll be sure to put a link in the description on this episode as well. Now, I don't know if you guys feel the same way that I do, but I found there to be like a pretty huge gap in quality between the first 4 movies that we saw versus the second 4 movies. Did you guys find that as well?
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Okay.
These were a lot better.
I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page with that. The first movie we're going to be talking about this episode is Cure. Now, this came out in 1997. It's directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. I have a synopsis here. A frustrated detective deals with the case of several gruesome murders committed by people who have no recollection of what they've done. Chris, as our guest, we'll start it with you. What did you think of Cure?
This is a film I have seen many, many times because it is a veritable masterpiece. I just love the way that this film works with this encroaching, impossible to define sense of dread, and it just permeates the film. It is one of the most unsettling, nerve-destroying films, and it all comes from that just inexplicable premise that it's working from. I absolutely love this film. I think it's one of the highlights of the J-horror cycle that happened both in the 90s and continued into the 2000s. It's a canonical text, and yeah, I love it.
I completely agree. I've only seen this once before, so this was the second time that I've seen this, and I actually forgot almost everything about it. I mean, I remembered loving it, and I remembered some of the bits and pieces, but I sort of forgot a lot of what happened in this. So I was really excited to come back to this, and I completely agree with you. It's out of all of these Japanese movies that got American remakes, I'm surprised that this one didn't, because I feel like this would be a perfect one to have some sort of terrible American
Yeah, I was about
remake.
to say, don't will that into existence.
Right. I'm not saying it should have happened. I'm just saying I'm surprised that it didn't happen.
It can translate super easily across like cultural boundaries, so that it seems like a no-brainer, but I think it's just it's too like idiosyncratic to really afford that kind of treatment.
Yeah, perhaps. Ken, what did you think of Cure?
I completely agree with both of you guys. I saw it. I actually hadn't seen it before today, and I just thought it was really fantastic. I think the major takeaway is just the incredible control of just mood, and every shot just having this specific feeling of dread to it that's never presumptuous, but is always just inherent. It just it's just such a big part of why it works so well, and it has that just baseline going for it, and everything builds on from that.
Yeah, so at its core, it's a murder mystery. There's this series of very gruesome killings that are happening, and it's kind of a detective thriller where you're trying to figure out what's going on here, but sort of the hook is that they catch the murderer in every single killing. It's different people, but they all sort of have the same MO where they don't really they remember doing it, but they also can't really explain necessarily why they felt compelled to do it. And also there's this like X that they carve, or a cross that they carved in every murder had this cross carved in the body. And I guess we should again reiterate that we'll probably put a blanket spoiler warning on all the movies that we talk about.
I think we've decided that the entire Saved by the 90s podcast
Yeah.
has a blanket spoiler warning on it. So
Yeah, I feel like sometimes, mentioning that again, but so I think that that's one of the most compelling things is like it's not a who done it because we already know who did it with every single killing, but it's like, why are they doing this? Is someone controlling them? What are the motivations behind the person pulling the strings? And I think that that's where a lot of the intrigue comes from with this story.
Yeah, it's a why done it, if anything, because it has these two layers of unknowability to the crimes. One with the people who actually perpetrate the crimes, who are doing it in an unconscious state, who are very aware of what in like the aftermath, they are very aware of their actions, but at the same time, the motivations behind them puzzle them, and that's really distressing to see. And then you have the actual like person behind all of this, whose name I believe is Mamiya, and his motivations are also impossible to know. So there's this impenetrable quality to what's going on at the center of this narrative that is just so unsettling, and it maintains that unknowability for like the whole ride of the film.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the other aspects of it is that we're introduced to the guy who is causing all of this fairly early on. So it's not like we're struggling to find the identity of the person who's doing this. We see who he is pretty early on in the movie, but at the same time, there's no loss of that intrigue, even though we do know who it is, because the entire time we're struggling to figure out what's behind all of this. How is he doing it? Why is he doing it?
Absolutely. It's a great sign of the movie's complexity that it recognizes that there is so much more to this story and to these dynamics than just figuring out who is behind this.
What did everyone think of their performances? Because I just adore the dynamic between Koji Yakusho, who plays the detective Takabe, I believe, and the serial killer, and how that's just like a frustrating like tete-a-tete between the two of them. One who is trying to pull out this motivation from a person who seemingly has none. And I just love the way that's played off in the film.
Yeah, they play off each other really well, but together, like, even then, that seems like another opportunity to underscore this, like, all these complex ambiguities and mysteries still come together, and like both of their performances put together in that unknowable space in between them.
Yeah, because they add this thing with Takabe's wife, who is not well. So there's that home life issue that he's dealing with also that's sort of stressing him out. I think a great example of a showcase of this dynamic that the two of them had was when they do that like hearing in front of like all of the, I guess they're all people in the police force, like like the captain's there and stuff, and just how Mamiya manipulates the captain and what he does with him and how that whole sequence of events occurs.
Yeah, it's a very frustrating kind of performance that he gives, and that's kind of like the secret terror behind it. It's almost like childlike in how in how out of it he is in comparison to the horrific nature of the actions that he's committing. It almost feels like mechanical to him, and that kind of links into the whole idea of like the psychological underpinning of the film with like it references like animal magnetism and so on and so forth. That character is one of the most frustrating, I think, villains to ever grace J-horror, and pairing him with that character with such a fraught home life, you can tell that he's feeling those same kind of frustrations with his wife, and it's manifesting in a completely different way with this serial killer.
It's almost as if he's taking his frustrations out that he feels with his wife on Mamiya, because
absolutely
he lashes out. He attacks him like multiple times. They always have to pull him off of him. And yeah, so that I think that frustration is palpable. And for the audience too, like you said, he is frustrating, an inherently frustrating character where he's this sort of constantly aloof, and he talks in circles, and like in one breath he'll say your name but then ask who you are and stuff, where he's sort of speaks in these strange existential this like existential prose. Who are you really? Do you really know who you are?
He speaks in very dense, I don't know, Instagram poetry.
Oh, that adds another shade of horror to this now.
Yes.
What did you guys think about because it is a horror movie. I would classify it as a horror movie. What did you guys think of the horror elements to it, the murders and such? Ken?
Well, I think for a movie, like I said, that is so such a mastery of its tone and its plotting and its character dynamics, there's not just individual scenes that deliver horror, though they do. It's just intrinsic. Like you're never like you just feel it's just a movie that's so great at making you feel continually tense and kind of wary the entire time.
Yeah, it's not like it's an over the top bloodbath or anything. It's not like there's jump scares being thrown at you left and right. It's a more subtle dread that it evokes, and I think even though it might not be like overtly scary, I think that the kind of subtle undertones make the whole thing kind of horrifying.
Mm-hmm. Especially like as it's a police procedural, like at its core. So the whole concept of having to take this impossible to define serial killer case seriously and meet this killer on his level and try to think like him, which is essentially a blank slate, is terrifying in its own right. The whole idea of getting into the mind of a killer when that mind is blank, unfeeling, and impossible to pin down what they want is it's a very kind of like simple shock and very easy to replicate, but I just find that terrifying.
Now we're going to talk about an animated film, Perfect Blue. This came out in 1998, February 28th, 1998 in Japan. This is directed by Satoshi Kon. I have a synopsis here. Retired pop singer turned actress's sense of reality is shaken when she is stalked by an obsessed fan and seemingly a ghost of her past. Ken, why don't you start us off and tell us what you thought of Perfect Blue?
So I've seen this film before. I saw it for the first time not too long ago, but I rewatched it. And yeah, I really, really like this movie as well. It's a very effective, very rife with pointed but well integrated into the plot levels of social criticism, just about like dehumanization in a broad pop cultural world.
Yeah, so you have this, as the synopsis says, she's a pop singer and she wants to transition into becoming an actress, and she gets a job on this TV show, and she realizes that she has to do a lot of things that maybe she doesn't want to do, didn't feel comfortable doing. There's a rape scene that she has to go through on the TV show, and then there's some sort of risque, not even risque, just like straight up pornographic photography that she has to go through as well. And it kind of crushes her in a lot of ways.
Yeah, this film, what I appreciate it so much is that it's going for that. It's trying to put a spotlight onto like the psychological toll that Japan's media industry, especially its idol culture, takes on the individuals, and how it kind of like can sever their consciousness between the image that they present and the internal, and that blurring is kind of like really mimicked in the style of the film, and how it's constantly going back on itself and taking you for a ride between the layers of media that she's featured in and the reality of her life, and how she's losing sight of that because she doesn't know who she is anymore. And again, just like with Cure, I feel this film is operating with such a powerful sense of dread and mystery that really works with the style that Cohen was known for. And I do love this film too.
And the great thing, like there's this maximalist feel towards like the tone of the film, so it'll be dread and misery, and then you'll get these just like overriding arcs of panic that are so effective.
Yeah, I really love this movie too. I saw this for the first time not too long ago as well. I feel this was the second time that I've seen this, and yeah, like the level of animation, the quality of the animation is so good. It's funny because like I'm not a huge anime fan, but there's some series that I'll get into, and it's always a little bit jarring when I go from watching a lot of anime TV shows to watching an anime movie and seeing the level of difference in quality between like a motion picture, an animated motion picture, compared to what we now see on TV. Especially, it seems like the more modern anime TV shows have a noticeable lack in quality. Like it seems to be getting worse than it used to be, but I don't know, maybe that's just me.
In that respect, though, Cohn was kind of a unique figure in his field. There's not many directors that you can either compare his style to, or the amount of care that he puts into his editing, his composition. He is just a masterful filmmaker, like regardless of medium. So like either animated or otherwise, although he didn't do any live action, sadly, before he died. Yeah, like you can tell where the money is spent on this film, because it is some of like the smoothest, like slickest transitions you can ever see in anime.
Oh, yeah, it looks it is so clearly meticulously well done.
And another thing that you'll notice, like in a lot of anime TV shows, there's a lot of corners that get cut. You know, it's like they only animate the bare minimum. You know, like a lot of stuff is just like static backgrounds, like the kind of looping backgrounds, and they try to use static imagery and sort of mimic motion as much as they can in those shows. And in this, it's like everything's moving. There's so much actual animation that's happening, even in the background, even like small things that they probably didn't need to animate, that they took the time and care to make sure that this feels like a very living world. And like the other thing is like the movements of the characters seem very, it almost looks like it's rotoscoped or something, the way they move, especially during like the dance scenes and stuff, when she's when she's performing with the pop group. It looks like the movement is so natural and real looking.
And I think just in terms of contributing to the effect, like the amount of detail and attention just given to motion in general in this movie kind of adds to that sense of disorientation, because it feels like it's almost jarring if anything were to, it would be jarring if anything were to just stop. Like everything's kind of moving and changing, and it's unsure and it's tentative, and that really kind of feeds into what the film's going for.
Yeah, near the end of the film, when it's working through like so many layers of her perception of reality, it doesn't stop like jumping her like sense of time until the very end, when like it's kind of all revealed. So it's such a disorienting watch because of that, and it's so effective in really putting you off of your sense of balance while watching it.
Yeah, and eventually what happens is once she starts losing herself, she starts seeing this manifestation of her former self talking to her and giving her advice and things like that. And that's when you know, like, okay, we're starting to break reality at this point. And from that moment, you're just never sure of if what is happening to her real. Is this part of it? And then, like you said, there's like sort of this time dilation thing that happens where you're not even sure when things are occurring in what order. And it's a really great way to structure a story like this. I think that it so accurately portrays this loss of self that she has.
And just the mental toll that fame, and especially this kind of fame, when it's not just the one property you're in, it's a whole media industry revolving around you and your appearances in them. It can really take so much of your sanity from you. And this is kind of what can happen, especially when there are people attempting to distort your sense of reality without your knowledge.
Yeah, one thing that I thought was interesting was there's this whole internet angle where she gets a computer and starts getting online and looking at what people are saying about her and stuff like that. And I thought that that was like something, a really interesting dynamic to bring that into it too, because this is still like relatively, I mean, the internet's becoming pretty predominant by this point, but it's still sort of like an early days type of thing. And I thought that the use of technology was pretty surprisingly accurate.
Yeah, it's just another detail of what makes the film so effective. It's not just like I keep coming back to that word, but detail kind of really is what sets it apart, because it's not just on a visual level, it's not just on a thematic level. It's about this very careful, like almost like this careful examination of individual things from moment to moment that create this sort of hyper real to surreal feeling throughout the entire thing.
I have a question for you guys. I don't know when you first experienced this film and when you did this rewatch of it. Has your opinion of what it portrays changed at all since the invention or like ascension of stan culture, especially within like the K-pop context?
That's a great question. So I just looked it up. I first saw this June 28th, 2014.
Oh, so we were well in the realm of stan culture.
I can't really comment on that because I think I watched for the first time like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I see, okay.
So I mean, I guess my opinions on it and how it could be interpreted for like a modern day for a modern day audience, I think, yeah, it'd be pretty much the same.
Yeah, but I think just over time, as we keep as the idea of like this multifaceted, multidimensional idea of what it means to be a person in the public spotlight or a famous person keeps evolving, is that I think it does continue to be more effective, because you talk about this character and how she feels like she's completely lost touch with any ability left for her to have any sense of autonomy or ability to connect with herself, and you see like what it means to be a celebrity now means to be expected to have every facet of your life prepared for public consumption, and to either, if you can't obviously put yourself out there to a degree that's completely unrealistic, you have to create this artificial version that you're comfortable with sharing. And if that's what people associate you with, then on some level then you feel like you can only associate with that created version that has now become a public thing that you don't have any control over anymore.
I would suspect that things are pretty much the exact same right now in Japan as they were back then, maybe worse. Like,
idol culture still definitely exists, and it doesn't show any signs of going anywhere.
I think with the proliferation of social media and things like that, I think it's probably just gotten bigger.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine if now that there's that added dimension where at any point in the day you are expected to still be online and sharing and accessible just at any time, at any day, at any point.
Yeah, I think that's probably correct.
Yeah, and like just what I also love about this film is how it gets at that sense of fandom can be a very possessive thing too. One of my favorite shots in the film is the stalker character for the character Mima's final performance. He like holds out his hand, and we see it from his perspective of him like cradling her as she's on the stage. And like, if there's ever a metaphor for what kind of stan culture represents, like just gift that and plaster it all over social media.
Yeah, we should probably mention there is that whole stalker angle in this too, where she has this crazed, really grotesque stalker guy coming after her. That's
His character design is so horrifying.
I know. It's like some kind of golem creature. This is another must see, in my opinion. Even if you're not a big
Absolutely.
Japanese animation fan. As I said, I'm not a huge anime buff, but to me, this is like a must see.
I 100% agree with that. The entire filmography of Satoshi Kon, Gone Too Soon, just a wonderful filmmaker that I will always champion. His works are just so fascinating and layered, and Perfect Blue is like his first outing as a director, and it's all here. He knocked it straight out of the park.
I did see Paprika. He did Paprika, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was his last film.
Yeah, I saw Paprika. I really liked that. What else? He did Tokyo Godfathers.
Yes,
Was
and
that him?
yeah, that was also him and Millennium Actress, as well as the TV series Paranoia Agent.
Oh man, that's right. Paranoia
Yes.
Agent. That was one of my all-time favorite anime shows. It played on Adult Swim, and that show is so good. Have you
Yeah.
seen it? It's incredible. That intro. Oh, best intro, maybe one of the best intros of any anime ever. So incredible.
Hmm.
Go see Paranoia Agent after you see Perfect Blue. It's
We are throwing out
Yeah.
all recommendations.
Good group
Definitely.
of films.
Yep. Speaking of films, moving on to our next one, we're talking about Tomie. This is directed by Ataru Oikawa. I have a synopsis here. A traumatized young woman is trying to recover her memories with the help of a psychiatrist. During her hypnosis sessions, she repeats the name Tomie, but is unable to recall where she knows it from. Now, this is based on a Junji Ito manga series, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
which I need to read more. I need to read his whole collection. I need to read everything that he's ever done.
He is a brilliant, sadistic mind. I did the Junji Ito read through not too long ago, and yeah, like there are so many just vivid, horrific stories that crazy man has come up with. So yeah, I definitely suggest everyone do the Junji Ito read through.
I think they did release all of his works like in a big collection not too long ago.
Yeah, that was Viz Media who released that. Those like nicely bound collections of
Mm-hmm.
like, especially with the Tomie franchise. Like they did the whole like all the chapters in one nice little collection. Spectacular releases.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get on that big time because I pretty much love everything that I've read some of his stuff, just not nearly enough. So the film version of Tomie, this was a little hit or miss for me. I dug the now I can't since I haven't read the manga series. I can't speak to the adaptation portion of it. Chris, you can probably speak to that more. But as far as the film on its own, I thought it was fine. I didn't love it, but I thought it was okay. There certainly were some creepy moments, but for the most part, I felt like the story was a bit too convoluted for its own good. And in the end, I was just like left wanting a little bit more out of it.
Yeah, it feels like a movie that simultaneously has a lot going on in it and not enough. Like there's a lot of information happening, but not a lot of it sticks.
And I feel like I did see maybe some of the sequels. I'm not sure how many of them. Maybe one or two of the sequels I saw back in the day. I think I saw Tomie Replay and maybe even Rebirth too. But I don't really remember those at all. And truth be told, I this was the second time I saw this one. I totally forgot everything about it. But I think I saw this like shortly after it came out.
I'm actually in the same boat as you because I have seen this film before and I didn't realize it. I've seen like I have watched the film, but like through the process of watching it this time for the podcast, everything started to click in again. It's like, oh, I accidentally like watched this way before we ever had the intention of doing the show. What I like about the series, and it's like a strike against the series too, is that every single film kind of begins hoping that the audience has a knowledge of the series, because they are like direct adaptations of very specific chapters from the like Tomie series, and it's such a weird strategy to adapt it like that, because it has so much context of this character welled up into it, but it doesn't let you in on anything.
Yeah, truthfully, there was a lot going on in this movie that maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, but there were a lot of parts of this, and this was like the last one that I watched just a little bit ago, that just elements that I didn't pick up on, or just maybe weren't explained well enough for me to truly understand what the hell is happening in this movie.
It is banking on you like having read the series before it, because it's like it's indistinguishable. Like it's so hard to parse without that foreknowledge.
Yeah, so just coming into it cold, it just felt like there were large chunks of it that I just couldn't process. It just felt like there were pieces missing, and it just kind of played as it was fine. It just didn't really leave any impact on me because I couldn't really connect to it on all the levels that it wanted me to connect on.
I'm glad you said that, because I thought after watching it, I'm like, I must have been spacing out or something, because
yeah, that's what I thought too. That's what I thought too for a minute, is that it was like, was I just not paying attention? But yeah.
Like add another layer of confusion to it. I have read the chapters before, and I was also quite lost while watching it, because it's not a great adaptation.
I mean, from what I've gathered, Tomie, was she killed? I don't know. I'm not even going to try to parse what was going on in this. Chris, can you give us like sort of just a high level synopsis of like what is going on in this story? Not specifically the movie per se, but just maybe like the overall story.
Well, like the whole series is kind of episodic in nature, centered around the ever expanding history of this one girl, Tomie, who is some type of eldritch monstrosity who has this kind of aura of male attracting succubus quality to her, where every male character who ever interacts with Tomie comes under her control, and to the point where nearly every story ends with them murdering her because they are driven mad by her incredible beauty. And the film and the next chapter would pick up with someone like finding the parts of Tomie and letting her regenerate and starting the cycle all over again with a new character.
Got it. Okay. I sort of understand that now.
So like the film is based like is like placed immediately after that happened, but you wouldn't know because there's no kind of like previous film to see it happen in. So you kind of have to know which chapter ended and which chapter this one is adapting.
Now, is this an adaptation of one of the chapters?
It is to an extent, but it takes liberties. I forget which chapter it is, but these characters, like the woman recalling her past and like Tomie's influence over it, yes, that is like from the series itself.
Okay, good to know. I'm definitely gonna read this whole series as soon as I can, because I think it's a really interesting concept. I like the idea of the story, but I just feel like the movie, there's just so many pieces missing that it made it difficult for me to really connect.
Yeah, the more that we talk about it as an adaptation, that makes sense that it does, that its problems do just feel largely adaptational, because you do have that feeling where you're having a lot of information thrown at you in terms of just getting everything in, but it's not really integrated and explained well, just in terms of the communication of film versus the communication of the source material. So that does make sense that the problems that the movie experienced do definitely feel like as we've said, what a bad adaptation would feel like. Not that it's a badly made movie. It's
no, I don't think it's a badly made movie, and I think that it feeds into a lot of the J horror tropes that we saw coming out during this time.
Absolutely.
According to IMDb, this was released on March 6th, 1999 in Japan. So this would have been, well, it says October. It also says October 6th, 1998. So
somewhere between October 1998
there's
and March 1999.
two release dates here. One, the 98 one says theatrical release. So this is right around, when did The Ring come out? The Ring came out in 98, but I can't remember the exact
I think you're
date.
right with 98.
Here's a fun fact about The Ring. It was never called Ringu. Everybody calls it Ringu, right? The Japanese version, but it was never called Ringu. In fact, when they were adding it to IMDb, they put Ringu as the title, and it just stuck. And then when they released the Japanese version here in America, they put Ringu as that title. That was like the crappy DVD release that we got over here in America, but it was never called Ringu over there. It's always just called The Ring. And they just called it Ringu when they were adding it to IMDb because it's how it's phonetically said. Just a fun fact I learned from, I had the Ring box set, and they talk about that. Oddly, the Ring box set is called Ringu, so they didn't even listen to their own bonus content.
I guess once you get to a certain point, it was that's the title that it is. So
yeah, but
that's the title that it is.
I feel like a dum-dum now, though, because I've always called it Ringu, and I learned that that's not even right.
I mean, that's what everybody else called it. There's no reason to think that it was basically a phonetic error entering into the IMDb.
Yeah.
Because how often would that happen?
I'm sure that never happens on IMDb. So the original Ring was released on January 31st, 1998. So I'm sure that by this point, Ring fever had struck, and I wouldn't be surprised if Tomie was a direct result of the success of The Ring.
Oh, it's almost guaranteed, especially in the way the film is shot. It's so reminiscent of that subdued style that both The Ring, now that I guess we're calling it, and the Grudge took on, where it's these kind of like unassuming kind of like very subtle shots of just really nothing happening, and like not a lot of things happen in this film. Which I just find so fascinating because you have such a rich text at your disposal, and you kind of mold it to what J-horror was defined by.
Yeah, there are really only kind of the spurts of horror in this. There was that one great shot of the guy who gets the umbrella through the mouth.
Yeah, it's true.
And out the back of his head. That was pretty good, but
it happens.
For some reason, I remembered this being scarier than it was, and maybe that's because I'm getting it mixed up with something else. Because right around this time, I was watching a whole lot of J-horror in like the early 2000s, so it's possible I'm getting this mixed up, or maybe I could be getting it mixed up with one of the sequels too. But I'll never forget that. It's got a great cover, the plastic bag with the head in it.
That amounts to like one kind of scene in the film.
Right pretty much at the very beginning, and you're just like, whoa, this movie's going to be intense. And then it's not.
Yeah, I was never really drawn to the horror in this film. What I was drawn to, and like I think throughout all of the 90s J-horror films we've discussed in both episodes, this is the most 90s in terms of fashion. Like, I adore the way everyone is dressed in this film.
Yeah, it's so funny you mention that, because as I was watching it, I thought to myself, this is like the most modern looking of all of the movies that we watched. Like just the fashion, the technology, like they're on cell phones and stuff in this, and this feels far more modern than all of the other movies that we watched.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, a big part of the fun of this podcast is looking at fashion choices of years past.
It's one of my favorite parts.
I wouldn't have mentioned it otherwise.
Come to the right place.
I think the general consensus is read the books before attempting to watch the movie.
Yeah, which is kind of it's usually a sign that the
Yeah,
movie
you
is not
shouldn't you
great.
shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, Junji
yeah,
Ito just has a really interesting relationship with media adaptations of his works. They're decidedly hit or miss, and this one I would put in the miss category.
So would I, unfortunately. I think maybe my favorite adaptation of his is still Uzumaki.
Hmm.
I think, to, man, that movie it gets me every time I see it. It's so disturbing to me.
Yeah, it's a solid, weird, unsettling film, and I'm so excited for the anime adaptation that's coming next year.
Yeah, I saw a little like preview of that, and I'm just like, holy cow, that looks incredible. All right, our final film this month is Wild Zero. This came out in 1999. It's directed by Tetsuro Takeuchi. I have a synopsis here. Only legendary Japanese garage rock band Guitar Wolf can stand between a race of aliens from destroying Earth with an army of zombies. Chris, what did you think of Wild Zero?
Welp, I kind of loved it, despite all of its very clear flaws and just how much of a vanity project this is for Mr. Guitar Wolf. I just found it so endearing despite all of its insanity.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I loved this. I thought it was a blast.
I I had a lot of fun
I
with
thought
this
it was
too.
an absolute blast. This has been on my watch list forever. I've been meaning to watch it. My cousin had this on VHS, and he was just like, "Dude, you got to see Wild Zero. You got to see Wild Zero." And I never got around to watching it until just this week. And man, I was not let down. To me, this is like this crazy Japanese version of Rock and Roll High School with zombies, and
Oh, yeah.
I'm just like, I am 100% in on this.
You gotta love a movie where the conceit is just that zombies
Yeah.
appear.
Yeah, yep. It's just zombies and Guitar Wolf, and they're fighting the zombies,
The only
and they're
thing keeping us from being overrun by zombies is a garage rock band who just can't help but voice how much they love rock and roll.
I like Guitar Wolf's music. I was familiar with their music, so I had a feeling that I was gonna at least dig the soundtrack. And it has a really good soundtrack too, not just Guitar Wolf songs either. They incorporate a lot of song selections that I didn't expect in this. Some American songs too.
Hmm.
If I had one criticism, it would be that there's not enough Guitar Wolf in this. And by Guitar Wolf, I mean the whole band, not specifically Mr. Guitar Wolf.
Maybe there could have been more zombies too. It just could have just been solely Guitar Wolf
Yeah,
and
I
zombies.
would love to an hour and 38 minutes of Guitar Wolf just dispatching zombies. I, I guess
Yeah, that's why we go to the movies.
another real criticism I had with it was that, like you just said, Ken, there's really not enough action. There's a lot of action to be sure, but there are certain points when there's these like lulls, and you're just like, what is happening here? Let's move on. Like we spend way too much time with those three characters in the car
Hmm.
when they're like driving down the road and stopping at the gas station, and the one guy tries to rob the place, and then we see the aftermath of that, and there's so much in here that's just like, we don't need this. Like we don't really need this to spend this much time establishing these three characters. Let's just get on with it. Let's just get on with flicking our infinite guitar picks and, that are zapping this insta killing the zombies with guitar picks.
Cut to the zombies.
I liked that they were the Dawn of the Dead style zombies too, where they were like bright blue in color.
Yeah, like
The zombies have a nice glow to them here.
Yeah.
it's the marker of a low budget film where they need to pad out to a full feature length, and so they'd have nothing to fill it with. So there's just these numerous scenes of dead time, and that's not what I want out of a Guitar Wolf film. Like, listening to his music, there is no dead time. He is all energy all the time. Give me that film.
Yeah. And there is a lot of energy, but there's just these certain moments where it's just like, I would argue that you don't even need those three characters that rob the gas station. Like, you can just get rid of them completely and still, keep the military woman, keep the ace, keep him in there, and Tobio. That was an interesting twist, the whole thing with Tobio.
I really kind of like seeing that, because it's such a rare thing to include it in one of these films. And probably what most people know from this film is that one quote from Guitar Wolf that I also posted to Twitter, like, love knows no boundaries, nationalities, or genders.
I have it. I took a screenshot of it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now.
It's incredible.
Love has no borders, nationalities, or genders.
Just,
if that shouldn't be a 2019 mood, I don't know
it's
what
true.
is. Also a 2019 mood, yelling rock and roll while
Yes.
things explode.
While jumping from a building and strumming your guitar.
I also took a screenshot of that.
That was great. There's just so much it's just such a charming movie. I feel like it has a really good heart to it. There was a lot of zombie heads getting exploded with questionable CG, and I thought it was just endless amounts of fun, this movie.
I agree. This is a short podcast because we agreed that we liked most things, but goodness, did we ever not if we didn't like most things here, this is a good time.
Yeah. I have really not too many negative thoughts about any of the four that we watched. The big question is that I will pose to the group is, what was your top out of these four? What was your top pick? Chris, we'll start with you.
Well, I thought about this too, and I think for me it was obvious that I'd be going back and forth between Cure and Perfect Blue, and it's what I've been doing for the past couple of days, thinking about of the four which would be my top. And I think I'm going to edge it out to Perfect Blue, because just for the fact that Satoshi Kon, despite his amazing career, is still kind of an underseen, under-talked about director. And I just love the way Perfect Blue can still be applied to our current celebrity climate, if you want to call it that. Although no like shade on any film we discussed today, maybe a little on Tomie. Like, I'm not going to be the dissenting opinion and say I did not have fun with Wild Zero, like a film that features Guitar Wolf cutting a UFO in half.
That does happen.
Rock and roll. Yes.
Okay, so Ken, what was your pick out of these four?
I also have to go with Perfect Blue. It is the impeccably made, horrifying film that, as Chris mentioned, keeps giving off terrifying dividends in our horrifying world.
Well, this is going to be a boring finale, because I'm also picking Perfect Blue again.
Say Wild Zero.
I should. I mean, Wild Zero is great. It really is. It really is great. But as far as impact, I think that Perfect Blue is a film that it stands the test of time. I think it's a film that you can watch, 20 years down the road and it'll still be relevant. And I think that it's an important film. And Wild Zero is just a blast. So I'd still recommend Wild Zero too. But so I think that goes without saying that Perfect Blue, out of the 8 films that we saw for this special, I'd say it's safe to say that Perfect Blue is our top pick when lumping the other 4 in as well.
Not a lot of competition in that previous 4 to either Cure or Perfect Blue. So yeah, I think it's a safe bet.
Yeah. It's just funny how the divide occurred, where these four were just so much stronger than the first four. Now, of course, there were highlights in the first set. Iko Azarak, I think, was a real surprise in how much I enjoyed that one. But there's also 964 Pinocchio, so that's in there.
Was hoping we could just not say that.
We have to. I don't want to talk about 964 Pinocchio anymore.
You don't want to relive that?
I'm still not okay with it. No.
I'm hoping Guitar Wolf and his film pushes all memories of 964 Pinocchio out of my head.
I just want to see Guitar Wolf fight 964 Pinocchio and destroy him with his rock and roll powers.
Rock and roll.
All right. Any final thoughts before we end it off?
Wish we didn't have to talk about 964 Pinocchio again just now.
Sorry, I brought it up.
I mean, I was gonna come back into my mind eventually.
Yeah, it's just living there. It's that's where it resides now. I will say as a fun anecdote, Guitar Wolf, the star of this wonderful film that we concluded this podcast with, also did the music for the Teen Titans cartoon series in the mid 2000s. So that's fun.
How about that? That's interesting.
Yeah.
So this and Teen Titans. That's all you need to know about Guitar Wolf's filmography.
They're still releasing music, by the way. I looked on Spotify and they had an album that came out pretty recently.
I was looking at some of the covers that they did of obviously they did a cover of Born to Be Wild and Should I Stay or Should I Go, and it is just fascinating noise rock that is really kind of hard to groove to, but it's really easy just to break things to. So
that's important.
All right. I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Chris, for joining us on this quest to cover 90s Japanese horror. It was very fun.
Yeah, anytime. I had an absolute blast.
And for those listening, be sure to check out Chris's podcast, Eiga Night, and hear all kinds of deep dive discussions on Japanese film, not just 90s horror, but everything.
Pretty much the day after that we record this, me and my co-host will be doing an episode on Akira.
Of course, please.
So another kind of horrifying film circulating, but not really in the 90s. So
yeah, what a classic. I love me some Akira. I used to have this really great box set. It was in a metal tin. It was really cool.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah.
I don't think I have it anymore. It was like an all black tin. It was really cool. Anyway, send us your questions and topics to 90s@filmpulse.net. And if you have a minute, consider reviewing us on your podcast platform of choice. For Ken Bakley and Chris Luciantonio, my name's Adam Patterson, and we'll see you next month.